Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I see we have a few more participants streaming in, but I'll go ahead and kick things off a little bit and talk a little bit about the format, and we're going to get in and start talking about Huron's Admitted Student and Parent Insights Survey. So kind of first preliminary, thank you so much for joining today's webinar. The way we're running this is it's as a webinar. So please, if you have questions, go ahead and send them via the chat function. And we'll address those as we can. There's also a few moments where we're going to have a poll to go out to get a little bit more feedback from you all. I know it's probably the lunch hour for a lot of folks, so I really appreciate your time. If you're not able to stay the entire time, just send us a note. We're recording this presentation, so we'll be able to send you the recording as well as the slide deck that we're reviewing. All right, I think I'll go ahead and kick things off a little bit. So my name is Bijan Warner. I'm a higher education consulting director at Huron. And today we're going to be talking about understanding the why behind enrollment and using our Admitted Student and Parent Insights Survey. So we'll do a little bit of the introductions, talk about the fundamental question that we're trying to ask, demonstrate why we believe that our survey instrument and our analytics reporting framework is really helpful to finding those answers. And then we're going to open up for a panel discussion to talk about how we've used this in very many different kinds of institutions. All right, so really quick introduction. So kind of from left to right, we have a great panel of people who have worked at very different institutions to talk about this. So we'll be introducing Scott Sportsman, Executive Director at the University of Tennessee, Shannon Zottola at Ursinus College, and James Fowler at Salve Regina University. Folks, if you wanted to say hi and wave. All right, I'll let them talk a little bit more about their experience once we get through some of the preliminaries. I'm also joined by my colleague, Jen Dowd, who really is the brains behind the analytics framework that we're applying here.
Hello.
All right, so moving on, we're going to talk about what we're calling the Admitted Student and Parent Insights Survey. And already you can tell from the name that there's two things we like to emphasize just in the title. First off, this is about insights. We want actionable insights. We want to make sure that we can influence operations on your campus. And we're also talking to students as well as parents, because we know parents are ever increasingly more involved in the student choice process, the college choice process. So I'll just take a moment here to get a sense of the audience. So if you give us a little feedback, have you ever done a survey like this before? So the most common version you might be familiar with is the Admitted Student Questionnaire, which is used to be run by the College Board. That is currently a discontinued product. Huron, or our predecessor Whiteboard, had run this ASBI. There are other survey organizations that have similar products. So if you can answer in the poll, this should be popping up. Give us your best estimate. I'll give folks just a moment to complete that. All right. So we'll bring up the results in just a moment. All right, thank you. So I don't know if you're all able to see the results. It seems like the ASQ is indeed, that's the modal category. It looks like a lot of institutions are familiar with that, or similar products by some other organizations. So let me quickly talk a little bit about the why and understanding the why behind enrollment. So I don't need to say this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. The last few years, we've had extreme volatility, not just in yield behavior, but in the rationale, in the way students perceive institutions, the way they pursue their college search process, and all the feedback that they're getting in all of their interaction. I think all of our taken for granted assumptions are really, we can't rely on them anymore. So we're really at a critical point. This is something that we've been doing for several years, but it's more important than ever to use this as an insight to understand students' college choice journey. So give you a sense of some of the questions. We want to understand where students are applying, which colleges. Don't wait until you have the clearinghouse data. We want to find out really quickly who are your competitors this year and how do you stack up against those competitors this year. We've also, recognized there's a million things happening related to the pandemic that affect students' college choice. Let's get that feedback now. And this is something that I'm always excited to field the survey, because until we field the survey, we have lots of anecdotes and lots of news articles about, well, students are thinking this, students want this, students want that. And the truth is, different kinds of students want different kinds of things. So by surveying admitted students, we get a sense of how are they ranking you? How did COVID-19 affect them individually? How did it shape their college search process? Again, we want to understand more about the factors that are important to students. We want to understand how that varies by student segment. And this is really, when we get into the analytic framework, Jen is going to walk us through this a little bit. Being able to quickly understand how different segments have different perceptions is one of the huge insights from the survey. We also want to understand ratings and feedback about your institution. And again, understanding that COVID-19 really did change the way students gather information about colleges. So that's, again, something that we can't rely on. And then pricing is an enormous factor. And we want to get into, again, a real-time understanding of attitudes towards pricing. So I'm going to give, again, recognizing that this is probably lunch break for many folks, I'm going to give the 10-second overview. It's going to be a little more than 10 seconds, but just a really high-level overview. And then we're going to go into some of these in depth. So first off, what do we do with the survey instrument? It's a comprehensive overview. It's kind of an omnibus. We want to really touch on every factor related to students' college choice. Timing, we can launch it immediately or as soon as possible, or we could wait until, many schools have a May 1 deposit deadline. You can wait until that point as well. And the way we do that, we're going to talk a little bit about this. To my knowledge, I think we're the only survey provider that has flexible survey administration processes. So we can do the survey administration on our end, or what we can do is we can synchronize with your CRM, and you can set up triggers. So if a student deposits or withdraws, that can be a triggering event that invites the students to the survey. And as we get into that, I think that opens a lot of really fascinating possibilities. Another unique factor is we have a 3-part reporting framework. So item 1 is the second the survey launches, you have access to a dashboard. So you don't need to wait 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months. The next day, you can see who's responded and what are they telling me. Let me read those open-ended responses immediately. Let me look at some of the overall tabulations of how students are responding. That's item 1. Item 2 is we set up an analytic dashboard. So we understand that there's several views that we want to look at by cross-tabulating different questions or segmenting by different student types. And we set this up in a Tableau environment to tell a story and then to allow you to immediately segment. So for example, if you're a large institution, and maybe Scott can talk about this, and you have different colleges, and your different colleges actually have very different kinds of students. Instead of trying to request a reanalysis, all you have to do is apply a filter, which is built in, and you immediately see how those students responded. And then the third part of the reporting framework is our analysts and consultants will work through all that data and help put together an executive summary. Now, we work in concert with our clients to understand who's the audience for that executive summary, what level of abstraction we want to do, and how do we tell a really short, tight story out of what is really a mountain of data. So to us, that's the creative part where we try and summarize and synthesize. Moving on, again, this is just the bullet points. Pricing, it's an all-inclusive. For clients that do this as a standalone project, this is a $9,500 project that has the survey design, the fielding, the analytics, and all the consulting services. There's no fee by number of responses, no additional fee for slicing, as I mentioned. That's really built into the Tableau reporting framework. And should you choose to do survey incentives, we have some guidelines, but we really recommend that institutions manage that themselves. So I'm going to pause a moment here. If y'all have any questions, go ahead and feel free to add them to the chat, and we'll address them as we can. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the content, especially for those of you who have not run a survey like this. College choice is an enormous theme. Like, there's so many factors that students are weighing and relating your institution versus other institutions. So we kind of lump them together in these 5 topical areas. One is just understanding college choice or choice set. What is that environment, that entire market of competing institutions? What was the second choice for students that are enrolling, and where for the students that didn't enroll, where are they going? We also have topical concerns. So I mentioned COVID-19. We have a series of questions on that we're going to maintain for our 3rd year in doing the survey. Test optional admissions and scholarship is another topical concern that we know it has not yet been settled in the marketplace. So we're going to want to continue to evaluate that. Another topical concern that came up was, if you all recall back fall of 2019, is when the National Association of College Admission Counseling counselors changed the rules on recruitment. We want to understand how that was, if students saw any effect of that. So we do want to have some of these topical concerns, and we want to do it at a general enough level that we're helping students give that feedback. There's lots of feedback on really specifics about the admissions and recruitment process, understanding kind of rating your marketing, your websites, what visits felt like, what interactions felt like, and that sense of being wanted by an institution. And then we have a set of questions that really help us get into that kind of comparative satisfaction. So what's important to a student? How satisfied are they with your delivery or the competitor's delivery? And then we do this really cool thing, and Jen will walk us through this, a gap analysis to say what's important to students and what are areas that you might have underperformed and factors that are very important to students. And then the final topical area being all on pricing and financial aid. All right, moving forward a little bit. So I hinted at this. This is what we're calling this flexible survey administration. We have 3 options. Up until now, most schools have been doing kind of the wait until May 1. Then your survey provider will release the survey to all admitted students, whether they've deposited or not. There's a simplicity to this approach. We're happy to do this. This is something we're very familiar doing. It's nice because you could really track your waves of invitations because they're all going out at the same time. And we typically like to field a survey for about 3 weeks, and then we close it up and go on to the analysis. We have 2 additional options. And again, this is we'll work out with you whatever works best. The second option is we work with your CRM to get you the unique survey invitations for each admitted student. However, you manage the invitation. Same process, same numbers of waves, except now you have a little bit of control over it. And as this is for schools, I know some schools really want to make sure all communication is going through their CRM. I think it allows you to really ensure that this is all coming out through one stream. Honestly, if you're going to go that route, we would actually recommend you going out to item C, which is to say, once we have all these surveys linked to each student, you can set up some triggered events. So if a student tells you that they're withdrawing their application, they don't want to enroll, if they're telling us at the end of March, if you wait 2 months to send them a survey, the odds of them responding drop dramatically. If you tell them immediately, we find it's the decision's fresh on their mind, they'll have a lot that they want to share. And the same is true of deposited students. If students are depositing now, they're excited. They want to tell you why they're depositing. They want to give you that real-time feedback about what they're excited about. So to us, it's a really exciting possibility. So if that's an option that you're interested in, we absolutely can work with you in your CRM as long as you have the CRM support. We are integrated with Slate. So if you are on Slate, it makes it very streamlined. However, if you're on another platform, we can work through that process as well. So now I'm going to pause for a moment, and that's just kind of the high level. I'm going to hand the microphone to my colleague, Jen Dow, to talk a little bit about the survey reporting framework.
All right, so we'll go through those 3 different reporting mechanisms, starting from the highest level, which is when the survey is still in the field. So what you're seeing here is we can lightly customize this to match your institution's color scheme and branding. This is the real-time dashboard, just a screen grab of that dashboard. And we'll send these to you so that you can see them at a meaningful level. So you'll get one report that's at the student deposit level, at the non-deposit level, and then the same for the parents. Here you're just seeing basic descriptives. So this question is overall value for the money of both your institution and then below the competitor institution. And we'll have this for all questions. And like Bijan mentioned earlier, you'll be able to see the open responses come through, as well as if you include any questions like, would you like to be contacted about X, Y, or Z, you'd be able to see that contact information real time so that you can respond to those students. This is open from day 1 or day 2, I will say, day 2, so that you can keep track of your response rates. And I find that clients use this pretty much all the time. So they already have a really good handle on their results when we get into the Tableau, which is great because that allows us to start really digging into the Tableau dashboard and start customizing. So you move on to the next slide. So we'll take a pause here. So this is where the bulk of the work will happen from the analytics perspective. What you're seeing here are 2 visuals from our Tableau workbook, and I'll just point out a few elements that are really important to that setup. So At a high level, we have filtering capabilities. So in the light blue across the top of the foremost image, you see survey group, plan to enroll, survey year, and then down the right side, you see a bunch of other filters for competitors that the students and families have indicated, as well as demographic information. So if you've supplied the demo information for your population of admits, we can append that to all of the data so that then you can slice and dice by whether they're a resident, what their major is, if they're a student of color, et cetera. We will also curate those. For instance, you won't get a list of 100 majors, you'll get a list of 5 majors that have sample size that's worth looking at within the survey. The filter behind, or the image behind, where you see competitor name and a bunch of institution names, that's a really simple image that shows where students who plan to enroll and don't plan to enroll chose as their other top institution. So this is actually looking at all of our institutions from the 2021 survey combined. So you can see Florida State University is the top institution reported among this group of schools for those who aren't planning to enroll. And then for the plan to enroll, it looks like Auburn is the #1 there. The foremost image, the front image where we see the diagonal, that gap analysis, is what Bijan referred to a little bit earlier, where across the x-axis, the horizontal axis, we're looking at importance to the students' decision-making. And across the y-axis or the vertical axis, we're looking at satisfaction. So we get to do that comparison of whether or not what's most important to decision-making is actually where your institution is performing well. And we would really get into the weeds here crossing this. We can look year over year to see if you've made shifts. We can look at the different groups, whether that's students or parents. It's especially nice to look at this from those who don't plan to enroll perspective to see where that gap is. So just to call out, you can see you're pretty much on the diagonal here, which roughly says the things that are important are the things you're doing well at. But if you look at net cost, that's always the spur on everyone's side, where we can see that it's a very important thing coming in at #3, but the satisfaction level with that is pretty low compared to the rest. So very high level overview, just the beginning of what we can, how we can cut this up for you. And then at the end, you will get this workbook yourself. So we'll dig through it together. We'll go through the details. That'll really inform the executive summary, but then you'll also know how to use this book on your own. And we can move on. So executive summary, something I'm sure folks have read a million of in some way, shape, or form. So I've just highlighted a couple of examples. We've got a PDF in the background, so we're happy to provide something that's more of a one-pager or a written executive summary, or depending on the audience that you want this to be shared with, we can also provide more summary visuals accompanied by main bullet points or driving questions that could facilitate a conversation. And these we would again cultivate, curate with you all after we've worked through the Tableau. And I think that's it, Bijan.
Great, thanks so much, Jen. And so what we'll do, we'll circulate these slides, and we'll also share out, if anyone's interested, some additional material just to go into the depth. This is one of our favorite views that summarizes a lot of information, but the whole point here is you have access to this mountain of data, and there's so many ways we can digest that and look for those insights. So let's stop for a moment. I'd like to run another poll, and getting a sense of kind of your potential audiences. So this is, do the best you can to kind of respond to this. We set this up as single choice, so you could do #7, multiple all the above if you're doing more than one. But if you can tell us which campus audiences do you feel that this is most useful for connecting with. Great, I'll let folks consider that. And then we're gonna move things over to our panel discussion. So I'm gonna start things off with Scott Sportsman. He's the Executive Director of Research and Analytics and Chief Strategy Officer at the University of Tennessee Knoxville. And I think as a large public flagship, Scott, you have very unique uses. You have very different audiences on campus, and you probably have to keep a lot of audiences happy in terms of providing different information. And so we'd love to hear some insights.
Should I wait till you get your, oh, here's your answers. Okay, there you go. So cool. So yes, so I'm at UTK, Tennessee Knoxville, and we're pretty big, like 31,000 total students this past year, 25,000 undergraduates, and like incoming class of around 6,000, with plans on being bigger. So we have run this survey the past couple of years, and I guess I want to talk a little bit about what we've done with it in terms of some changes we've made, and then I'll talk a little bit about how we use it to communicate out to others. We perceived our visit program as really top notch. Like, we get incredibly high quality students. You'll get thousands of applications for the 200 spots we have on student ambassadors. It's a crazy idea that we thought we were great in. But then when we got our first year's worth of data back on this, there's a section around recruiting, and our number of times that our campus tour and then the virtual tours we brought up that were sort of perceived as worse than our competitors when the student picked their competitor as to do this really shocked us. Actually made for a lot of self analysis of us. We can see an improvement. Of course, we kind of changed a lot of things. We spent a lot of time talking with our tour guides around what they said. We saw weaknesses in the people's, especially those who don't plan to enroll, around what they thought of perceived as our strength of our programs. A lot of people perceive Tennessee as a great place socially and like a beautiful campus, but they weren't as high ratings and on our academics piece. So we actually had our tour guides spiel kind of altered a lot to make sure they included a lot more information around academics. We changed where they go on the tour so we could go by some of our more showcase facilities around academics. We got away from looking at the football stadium and the basketball stadium and those things to more focus on academics. And we actually see, because we've done it 2 years now, so we can see an improvement on our tour experience from the ratings of parents, particularly on students who are not coming. It's good to know what they're perceiving us as. They're always slightly weaker, but that piece is really improved, and hopefully will show more improvement. I should have said we go with the one-time administration in late May, early June. And so we run through all of our admitted students, and our response rate is actually really pretty good, upwards of 30% when you include the partly answered one. The other piece, besides sort of the information on communication, in the slide that Jen showed around the rankings of things, right? A couple of things that we thought would be more important to students doesn't always show up that way. Like, study abroad for us is not as significant. I was at Miami University of Ohio before, and study abroad was a big component of their sales pitch. Here, students are not giving us the same level of, I'm not sure what happened there, thank you, same level of interest in study of abroad. Like, you can see this is actually probably us. The lower category there, that lower quadrant, is kind of where there's lesser importance. And we were kind of surprised by that piece. We expected a net cost to be out there, but that, and then the alumni success piece, we probably don't speak enough around the success of our alumni, even though it's got a good satisfaction rating. We probably ought to add more to that in terms of what we can talk about in our tours. The other part, you can see kind of a lower rating for program facilities, and out there showing all my data, I'm actually given a piece there. We have a new engineering building. We changed the direction of our tour quite a bit just to get at showcasing our facilities more, because we were kind of surprised about the weakness of our recommendations there. The nice part I can do, that this is a snapshot of it, is we can switch who's being viewed. Right there where it says all for survey view and plan to enroll, we're really interested in what the parents are thinking a lot, and on the ones who are not enrolling. The people who are enrolling, we get really strong ratings. It doesn't change the importance a lot, but it does some. But the people who don't enroll, those are the ones we're really significantly interested in. And then what their parents are saying is often quite different than their student. The other piece that we see is we love the multi-year approach, because it made us feel better about ourselves. For one thing, we improved on, there's a place where it's basically satisfaction over time. And when we look at parents, on those who didn't attend, our ratings improved on every last one of those except net cost, some quite significantly. And then the competitor scores went down on the general piece. So we were quite happy that we made improvements there. And, we were, 350 students larger in our freshman class last year than in the previous year. So we think there was a lot of success there in terms of the adjustments we made to the activities we do, and really the spiels for our student tour guides and the impact on that piece. In terms of sharing, we're a Tableau online environment. So when Jen got this to a final product, we brought it up in our online environment and shared it with all of our admission counselors and leadership in enrollment management, which includes registrar and financial aid and all this stuff. There's a lot of good information around financial aid staff in terms of responsiveness, things that way. We also did a visit to every college. We have 10 colleges when you include undeclared students. And we did a tour where we went not just around this, but around their whole goals and success from the past year. But this was a part of what we shared with them around their individual looks at sort of the slide that Jen has most important up here. And some of the ratings that we found significant gaps between, like Tickle College of Engineering here is having lower yields than we expect them to have, and they've fallen over the last couple of years. So we shared some things around their tour information, and I think might have had some impact there as well. We also, nursing and engineering both wanted to see their comment fields. So neither Jen or Bijan has mentioned, but the students have an open-ended sort of comment field. And it was really informative to look at the ones who don't come, because sometimes, it's anecdotal, but sometimes there's clear trends in what you can see. And nursing felt there were some really strong trends in what's going on in state for them. So I think that piece was something we provided to the colleges that sort of was an additional piece that we hadn't perhaps considered doing when we ran through all of these things. The interesting side of all of this, right, is I think there's an improvement in our credibility, right? Like a lot of times people will say, well, are you visiting high schools? Like, I think they're going to give us a good idea. Like, maybe you should go visit the students where they are. It's like, oh yeah, we thought of that. So this is another one. They said, why don't you talk to the students and see why they're not coming? Well, okay, we do it every year, and we actually have tremendous data to share with you back. And so I think there was a win there when the colleges saw that this is what their students are saying when they're not coming. And that piece, right, not only helped them think about what they're doing, but it gave us sort of the role of expert as a credible expert, I think helped perceive, especially in the year of BAM modeling, right? So where the way financial accountability is going to be at the college level now, it's going to impact our spending too. So that's probably where I am mostly have things to say. Like, it's a really robust set of filters. You can see down the side. We have diced by a lot of these things, and the nice part is I have enough sample size in order to really drill into these pieces. That might be a challenge on others. I'll stop there and answer questions later if there are any, but pass it to someone. I don't know who wants to go next.
I want to say thanks so much, Scott. I do have a few questions for you, but I think what we'll do, we'll let each panelist introduce a little bit of their use case, and then we might have some questions that apply to all. So we're going to move from the University of Tennessee Knoxville to Ursinus College, which is in Collegeville, just outside of Philadelphia. So I'm going to have Shannon Zottola speak. She's the Vice President and Dean of Enrollment, Management, and Marketing at Ursinus College. Shannon, what have you done with the ASPI?
All right, well, thanks. So like Scott, we've been using the ASPI for, I think, 3 cycles now, which has been, I think, given us a nice, robust collection of data that we can track year over year. So certainly, I think a lot of what Scott talked about in terms of sharing and usage will apply. What I wanted to focus on in terms of as the VP of Enrollment, what I found to be really beneficial is how I can use this when kind of managing across the senior leadership table and up to the Board of Trustees. So I have found that while sharing this data selectively, certainly with folks across the enrollment division in financial aid and admissions and marketing as well, using it strategically, not giving full access to colleagues across campus, because I feel like that could be a very dangerous endeavor. Since, as Scott mentioned, I think a lot of people feel like They know everything that we do and can do it better sometimes. So giving them this data, I think, could be a little interesting. But thinking specifically about budget planning and priority setting related to the needs within the enrollment division here, which includes marketing, which is a huge piece of the value that I find in this survey, it really has allowed me to say with confidence in showing data where we need to invest, resources. For instance, one of the things that since I've arrived on campus here at Ursinus, and I've been here approaching 4 years, is that our location really hurts us, and that compared to other institutions that we're competing with, oftentimes students look at our location and think, oh, why would I want to go to Collegeville, Pennsylvania? And Collegeville, Pennsylvania is absolutely beautiful and a great place if you have a chance to visit. But I think what this survey has shown us is that it's actually a strength. Students by and large and parents are very happy with our location. And the fact that we're talking about potentially investing significant resources, in conjunction with the town, I think this data is really telling. Is that where we need to put our resources, or should we be placing those dollars into some other strategy in one of the quadrants, down below, or where it's of significant importance, but we are not hitting the mark. And so that has really, I think, allowed me to ask for and indicate exactly why dollars might be needed in certain places. I also have really liked to use this to do a little bit of my own myth busters. So certain groups on campus feel that we excel at some of these factors, and it has been very interesting to show that actually we are, as Scott said, not doing nearly as well in certain pieces as one would imagine. And maybe we're knocking it out of the park in certain places, but those things are not important. And that has been, I think, tremendously helpful in my role in being able to advocate for the things that are really, really important. Certainly, I think it has helped us identify where we need to invest dollars in future studies. So, Bijan, as you talked about, the net cost is always something that is challenging, but looking at the year-over-year data, is it time for us to invest in a significant pricing study? Are things shifting so dramatically that we need to take a closer look? Or based on the marketing data that we're seeing come out of this, is it time for a new brand assessment? Are the messages we're putting across actually contributing to how we're being perceived with academic reputation and social reputation and program prestige, and those things that are a little, sometimes can be a little tricky to get funding for, because people feel like maybe you don't see an immediate return. And the last thing that I'll talk about, because I definitely don't want to take too much time, I think the first thing I asked Rob for when this came out was the open-ended responses, because it's like, Christmas morning when you're reading what is happening there. And I think that is very telling. And one of the things I was able to do within those open responses, there was an admissions counselor and a financial aid counselor who was repeatedly mentioned by name as being the best in the business that these families had worked with. And it came from both students who chose to enroll and students who didn't. And so these people were just, you could see they were rock stars. I'm able to utilize that to provide promotions to people that I know are doing a good job. The numbers are indicating it, but when you're hearing from families repeatedly that this person is the reason they attended, or they would have come, but things didn't line up, but they have to give a shout out. And I think that allows us to really boost morale in ways that maybe we weren't able to if we didn't actually have this data. So a lot of amazing things, happy to answer questions. I'm very excited for another launch of this as the years get trickier. I think this tool becomes even more powerful than it has in the past.
Great, thanks so much, Shannon. That's really helpful. So we have one more panelist, then I'm going to open up some general questions. So I'd like to introduce Jim Fowler, who's coming from Newport, Rhode Island at Salve Regina University. Jim is the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Admissions. Jim, how have you used the ASPI?
Thanks, Bijan, and thank you to everyone. We've actually been using the ASPI for quite a few years. I think we may have been sort of the beta test site, one of the beta test sites for this tool. And it's provided us some really important longitudinal data that has allowed us to track some of what we have been doing strategically and some of our process in terms of how we plan marketing and communications, how we plan messaging, and has been able to really demonstrate how we've moved the needle in a number of areas. So in particular, one of the things that we as an institution were really concerned with now 5 or 6 years ago was we felt that people weren't perceiving our academic program to be as strong as we felt it was. And so we began to re-engineer some of our messaging and our communications, increase some investment in some marketing, and really centered around building up that profile of the institution as being one of academic rigor. And that was showcased over time within the ASPI. That was the one tool that we had that was really able to give us hard data that said, yes, over time, as we've rolled out these marketing messages, as we've invested in marketing and communications, we've been able to change family and student perceptions about the university based on whatever it is we've been saying, however we've been saying it, it's coming out in the back end. And it was showing up both in students that chose the university as well as people that didn't choose the university. So we saw, great consistency there, which was really important. Shannon and Scott touched on a number of the other areas that are obviously critical to the success of the ASPI, the ability to use it to leverage for additional resources. So being able to defend some of the marketing decisions we made and said, if we want to continue this trend, we need more resources. And here's the data that shows why and how all of this is going to happen. So we think it was very critical in us allowing us to get the resources that we need as an office to do our job. Shannon mentioned a little bit about open-ended responses and the ability to utilize that for morale amongst staff. And I think that that's also really useful, and not just for admission staff, because I think a lot of times those of us in the senior enrollment management seat tend to come out of the admissions background, and we sort of think about the recruitment aspect of it. But the financial aid aspect of it is so critical in today's world. And I think that financial aid professionals are so used to dealing with the negative aspect of, you're not giving me the money I need, you're not making it so it can be affordable for me. They hear so much negative that when they get feedback from these types of surveys that say such and such financial aid counselors did such a great job to help me out and took the time I needed and really helped me understand, and we were so grateful for it. Like, to be able to share that with financial aid staff is so valuable and really important in helping them understand that they are part of the overall operation. It's not like it was 30 years ago where financial aid was sort of an afterthought. Now financial aid is so closely integrated, and the ASPI has certainly demonstrated that for us as well. In terms of data sharing across campus, obviously, we utilize this at senior management level. We also utilize it. I utilize it every year in faculty. I present to our faculty at the beginning of every academic year, and they want to know, who's coming in and what do they look like. But it also gives me an opportunity to impress upon them their importance in the recruitment process, and how for many of these families, they're making the decision based on an exchange or an interaction that they had with a faculty member or a perception of an individual academic department. And so one of the other things that came up over the years as we looked at the ASPI was that families weren't necessarily looking at Salve and the academic quality of Salve based on the institution. They were basing it on their individual academic program. And the ASPI allowed us to have some really important conversations with faculty about how critical it is for them to promote their individual department throughout the process and how critical they are and the role that they have in the overall reputation of the institution, not as faculty members of the institution, but as representatives of their academic discipline. I think the last thing that I'll say is you hope that the ASPI is going to be something that's going to reinforce the things that you're doing well. But you're also going to have some bad years. The reality of this volatile marketplace is very few institutions can always get it right. And we had a really bad year in 2018, and the ASPI was really the tool we used to dive in and do the post-mortem analysis and figure out where it was where we made mistakes. And the data allowed us to show that it was really about our financial model, that we tried to be too stingy with our dollars. We fell into the trap that many institutions do when things are going well, that the board of trustees says, hey, pull back on that discount rate. We really want to see that discount rate coming down when you're making your classes. And, we said, we're not really sure about that, but okay. And that was a bad idea. And the ASPI really bared that out, because what we were able to show was data that demonstrated that people were still looking in our direction. People were still interested in us in the same ways that they were previously. The one variable that was different was I didn't get enough aid, and this institution over here gave me X amount more. And that number was also very clear through the ASPI data, so that we could, in our next year, rejigger our model and make sure that we were adjusted correctly for our market share.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. Thanks, Shannon and Scott, as well. We're going to open this up for some Q&A. So for those who are listening or participating at home, go ahead and click the Q&A button at the bottom and submit questions. We'll answer them or pass them out as they come through. While you do that, I just want to say it's really great to hear everyone's perspectives on the panel today, because Jen, my colleague Rob, and myself have been evolving the ASPI in working with you, right? So we've gotten the feedback of what's helpful, what isn't. And that's been really our entire goal. Is we don't want to do this as a perfunctory exercise. We don't want to just do a survey that you get 3 or 4 months later, here's some generic results. Each of you have had issues. Each of you have had problems. Each of you had questions come to you that you haven't really had the data at your fingertips. And this has been one great repository to say, well, what have students told us? What can we do with that? And Jim, I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember that year very clearly. It was when my youngest was born. So I remember Rob was stepping in a lot at that time. But when there's a bad year, it's very easy. This is like human nature. We say, well, I clearly messed this one thing up and that was why, without gathering data. Like we latch onto those excuses. And it's like, you have to stop before you latch onto the reason. You have to do that analysis. You have to understand what it is. And I like how Shannon described that as myth busting. Like we all fall onto those myths. We hold on to those myths. Let's see what the actual data show us, what the data share. So let's take a moment here. I see, okay, so there is a question about a product that targets inquiries. Rob Bilby, I'm wondering if I could call on you, and if your audio is not there. This specific product is geared, the questions are geared towards admitted students, and we have questions assuming that they've gotten that far in the process. Rob, do you want to talk about our survey capabilities towards inquiries?
Sure. So Rebecca, great question. And yes, we've done surveys of inquiries, and it tends to be a little bit either up funnel or down funnel from this process. So we've done a lot of this work in the pricing space to understand what competitive set you're balancing an institution against, and what are the important characteristics that you're considering for application, and then how does pricing play into that conversation. All of this sort of grew out of a completely custom survey creation capability that I'll look directly at Jen Square when I say that, because she generally does all of that work for us. But we've done that for several institutions, and especially in places where, I'm thinking of relatively small applicant and admit pools. You don't want to go out to the 150 to 300 applicants admits that you have. We don't have a lot of statistical leverage there. So you might want to move up funnel and think about how could we be driving more applicants? How could we be creating more behavior in that way? Some of the questions are going to be a little bit different, but broadly, a lot of the logic that we leverage here is applicable to that population as well.
Good. Thanks, Rob. So we have another question about, do we send a separate survey to parents, or do they complete questions on the same survey with students? It really is a parallel survey instrument. In other words, they're asked the same questions, we just change the language. So it's all about your student. Jen, do you want to talk a little bit about how the parent survey comes in and how we combine those analyses?
Sure. Yes. So we're often asking about the parent's perspective. Sometimes we do make it clear that we want to know about where their child was thinking about when they made their decision, or what factors they were thinking about. So we try to be clear in that perspective that we're looking for. The language, like Bijan said, is very similar. And then we haven't really talked about customizations yet, but I'll take a moment to do that here. Because we like this survey to be useful in the moment, we've talked about the COVID questions, the NACAC question, et cetera. We're happy to adjust language, especially in that break between parents and students, if there's anything that's more or less relevant for those populations. And then we can also discuss custom questions, whole cloth, to add value to the survey.
I kind of wish that all we did was the parent survey sometimes, because if I just listened to the parents, I'd be over-enrolled every year.
They're more sensitive and aware of pricing, I think, that's for sure.
And career outcomes. That's another one where the parents really like to hammer. Students don't neglect that, but the parents tends to hammer on that one a little bit.
I sure wish student A enrolled, but I've got student B in the wings who's still very interested. Yep.
So if there are any other questions, please go ahead and type them in. We'll address them. I'm wondering, again, I'm glad, I think Shannon brought up the open-ended responses and the value of that. And again, I think there's a sense, and my background was trained in social science methodology, where we talk about sample size and you try to underscore or underemphasize anecdotes. And I think that's actually, if you actually are trained in a qualitative research framework, that's actually not how you think about these things at all. We are trying to understand a perspective, we're trying to understand meanings. And as Shannon mentioned, you could also look for themes, or sometimes you get oddball responses that you just kind of have to ignore or discount. But sometimes you get those oddball responses that help kind of frame something in a way that you might not have thought about framing it that way before. So I guess maybe an open question for the panel is, did you have any really memorable open-ended responses or open responses that actually helped you do something, even if it wasn't a surprise, but it really helped you tell a story?
So I have sorry.
Go ahead, Shannon.
I have a funny story about the open-ended responses. So I think it was our last survey. There had been a response that was from a parent, and it was a very specific response tied to athletics and why this student chose a different institution, and it named the sport, and the way that it was worded was, it was a very memorable response. And so when I was at NACAC, I actually was at a counselor reception and talking to an unnamed, not to be named counselor who was telling me that their son was looking at Ursinus, but they chose a different school because of an issue with the coach, and it ended up being the person that wrote that response. So it was a very clear to put those two things together, and an interesting reminder, that there are human beings at the other end of that survey who have very valuable insights to share. And how the worlds collided, I think was just a funny little anecdote for me. But I talked about using it for, morale and motivation. But by and large, I think that it really is helpful to understand what specifically is meaningful to people. It's different when you're looking at it in a drop-down box and answering a survey, but when people are putting their real hearts and thoughts and emotions into those responses, I think it comes through in a way that you don't necessarily get when clicking on all the amazing Tableau features there are, like you get hearing it in someone's voice and the impact it has had on their lives.
I would add that some of the responses are amazingly detailed, like multiple paragraphs of answers where, I can't even see it all on my screen. I have to export it to Excel or something just to read them. And most of them are that way. There's a few, it's like no or thank you, no or whatever, but a lot of people really invest their time in giving us really detailed answers, which is pleasing, informative, sometimes in a negative way, but certainly, very helpful that way.
I think the other thing that comes out of some of the open-ended responses is just how much this process is about fit. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in the numbers that we forget that at the end of the day, part of our job is to help connect students with an institution that's the right place for them. And sometimes we're not the right fit, and they didn't choose us for the right reasons. So, certainly over the last couple of years, we got some responses that were around some social justice issues as a Catholic institution that were very critical to our mission and our identity. And people weren't happy with the way they were demonstrated on campus or put forth in signs and banners as the people walked around campus. And they said, how can you do that? And we sort of said, well, that's sort of who we are. So if you chose someplace else, that's not a bad thing. But it was, it allows us to keep our perspective that what we're doing is not just about filling a class. It's about filling a class with the students that are going to be the right fit for the type of educational experience that we're looking to provide.
And I'll add, when we are analyzing the results, we start from the open-endeds. It helps us build a relationship with the folk, with you all, to understand your data, to come up with those executive summaries, and then to dig in beyond what the crosstabs tell us. So I just want to point that out, that we let those drive the conversation. And then Jim had mentioned earlier that we can kind of track when the pulse on pricing changes. And for clients we've had for more than 1 year, where there has been steeper or lighter changes in discount rates, we can see that, where we see more families saying, like, you can count in the significant differences. Hey, I really wanted to go here, but I just couldn't make it work. And then the regimen gets tweaked, the pricing gets tweaked, and the next year those numbers go down. And so it's very, you can see it in the head count, but sometimes you can't see what's actually driving that. And so those open responses are super powerful for gauging those little changes.
Great. I see we have just a few minutes left, and I understand if folks have to run. I will say, if you are interested, we're going to send out this recording and the slide deck, and please contact Jen or myself if you're interested in signing up, and we can work through the details. But before we close, I'm just wondering, do the panelists have any questions for each other? No, I think there's actually, let's see. All right. Let's go ahead and I'll stop that. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Again, this is a really critical moment in the recruitment cycle. Students are making the choices now. We love hearing, they want to tell us about that. They want to say, I chose you or I didn't choose you, and this is why it's so important to me. We want to tap into that. This is that moment where we really get that kind of that real test. And Huron would love to be part of providing that feedback for your institution. Thanks again, everyone, for joining today. I hope you have a great afternoon.